How do they charge for?
Hello.
Okay, welcome to the, hello everyone, welcome to the, since I don't know what day it is, I gotta read it. Welcome to the Planning Commission Workshop Meeting for Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. I am Wayne Beeler, the Chairman of the Planning Commission. With me in the third floor conference room is James Harris, and online we have Nelson DeLeon, Peter Rye, and Will might join us a little bit later if he's not here with us already. Since he kind of 5:30 is tough for him because of what he does. So also with me we have Emily from the zoning department, Simon, our planner, and Jerome Skronkowski from Hawk Valley. And I see Shannon Poliari is online. Matt Fessler, our solicitor, and Paige Brookings, who I forget what you do, Paige.
I'm working right now with Reading Redevelopment Authority, and also support to Chris.
Okay, great. That means that you know Peter pretty well.
Hi, Paige.
Okay. So do I hear a motion to accept today's agenda? I'll make a motion. Okay, thank you, James. Second?
Second.
Peter? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I guess we have 4 here today. Very good. And today we're going to have a review of the City of Reading Housing and Blight Property Strategy, which was originally created back in 2019. The current administration has resurrected it because well, it was a really good plan, and you know, why invent the wheel if we already paid the money for it? So I guess Shannon's going to present this, or will Paige present this?
Now I'm going to present it. So let me share my screen. Okay, you can see everything?
Yes.
All right, thank you for having me tonight. I'm Shannon Kalori with Hailstone Economic. I'm going to talk about the City of Reading's Housing and Blight Strategy, which is a plan. As Wayne said, it was developed in 2019, and my company, Hailstone Economic, was brought on board in 2020, 2021 to help implement the plan. So the city's been actively working to implement this plan for the last 4 or 5 years. And the city just recently approved it. City Council just recently approved the plan as policy for the city. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the plan says, as well as some of the top blight remediation priorities that the city is working on this year. So here's the plan. I think it's on the website. I'm sure Simon can get you a copy if you haven't seen it. But it was developed by Branton Strategies back in 2019 with some state funding. And I think it's an excellent plan that highlights a lot of the national best practices as you think about housing and blight remediation. It identified, I'm just going to highlight a couple parts of the plan, but it identified kind of approaches, new approaches to thinking about blight. And it suggested that, you know, the city should really focus on a data-driven, systems-based blight remediation strategy. And so one of the things it recommended that the city did, especially as, you know, as we talk about these dates, 2019, 2020, 2021, we were in the middle of the pandemic. And so it became challenging for code enforcement to actually go into properties, or they weren't allowed to go into properties. So one of the things this plan recommended that the city code enforcement officers did during the pandemic is a parcel by parcel property condition survey. and they put all this data into a city database. And so they're able to use this data still today, update it, and use the data to identify and figure out how to prioritize properties. They put this data into a tool called Building Blocks. And so again, this tool is data driven. It's a tool that communities are using all over the country that the city purchased, and you can analyze parcel data by whether it's vacant, whether there's a lot of crime in the area, the last time it was inspected, the types of conditions they saw when they did this external survey. And so this plan recommends really data driven code enforcement, and the property may doing data-driven code enforcement right now. They also, the plan highlights, thinking about, equitable blight remediation and understanding that not everybody who has a blighted property or who needs a new roof or whose siding is falling off can actually afford to remediate or repair their property. And so as you think about, the end result, the goal is having properties free of violations and having properties that are compliant with the code in the city. You have to think about kind of some of the root causes, and so thinking about creating programs to support property owners who absolutely should be staying in their properties but might need some financial assistance with maintenance and repairs. And then the third kind of concept that this plan really suggested that the city think about is a collaborative approach to blight remediation and really engaging a team of partners. I've worked in a lot of cities. I've been a code enforcement officer, and everyone loves to talk about how the code enforcement officers need to do a better job and work harder and do more. And yes, there's always room for improvement in the code enforcement world. But ultimately resolving these problem properties involves a team. And so thinking about your nonprofit housing partners, thinking about, state and federal funding, just thinking about bringing, teams of people, even for-profit housing developers can support redeveloping these properties. And so who is this team? Or, identifying people who have rehab skills in the city and engaging them to help rehab somebody. So really thinking hard about who this team is and bringing a team together to resolve some of these properties. So those are kind of three big picture concepts. And then the plan identifies a number of recommendations and strategies that I think, again, are excellent and kind of national best practices. And so the next three slides are really just pictures out of the plan that highlight the recommendations. So of course, we're thinking about facade programs and sidewalk programs. There's a lot of state laws. I always say that the Pennsylvania state legislature has done a really nice job of listening to communities and putting laws in place to support code enforcement operations. One of them is to be able to disqualify negligent property owners from county tax sales. So, the role of the city here is then to understand that law and engage in that law. And to, what happens now is that counties will send these lists of property owners prior to a tax sale to a property maintenance department, and they can identify people who have who should be disqualified from buying more properties because their current properties are in bad shape. Thinking about home repair and rental rehab assistance programs, thinking about pre-sales inspections. The code enforcement office is absolutely thinking about a pre-sales inspection ordinance. It's not in place, but they're kind of working through that process right now. And then really thinking about enforcing codes strategically. Again, at the end of the day, we're looking for code compliance, and how can we work with property owners to get them there instead of looking at it as slapping people on the hands with violations, which is an important part, a necessary part of this process. We're really trying to understand the root cause of the violations and working with property owners to gain compliance. There's a lot of recommendations in about remediation, creating a problem property inventory, and this is a lot of what they did during the during the pandemic when they did this external survey of properties because they couldn't get into properties, but identifying, and then they're able to map all these properties and you can see clusters, and then you can kind of make some really good decisions about how to prioritize these properties for intervention, and understanding the different types of intervention that are at our fingertips, whether it's rehab or acquisition or demolition. And then also thinking about a foreclosed property registration fee. And so the city does have a foreclosure property registration program. And then the third step here is redevelopment, thinking about how to convey vacant lots to neighbors. It's one of the things the Redevelopment Authority has done recently. They had a number of vacant lots that they'd acquired over years, and they were not lots that could be redeveloped. They were small slivers of lots, but the Redevelopment Authority owned them, and therefore they had to insure them. And so they've spent some really good time over the last couple of years conveying these lots to neighbors, getting them out of the Redevelopment Authority's inventory and responsibility, and getting them into the hands of the neighbors who are probably already mowing the lots or taking care of the property anyway. We need to think about strengthening incentives to attract investment, and thinking about, whether it's, tax incentives or connecting state and federal funding opportunities to problem properties. But there's a lot we can do to think about, what can we do to really attract investment. And then thinking about methods of acquisition, and there's a number of different acquisition methods. The Redevelopment Authority, of course, has the power of blighted property, eminent domain, where they can take certified blighted properties through the eminent domain process, following the state laws. And so this plan really outlines a number of really great tools that can be used. And so I just have 2 more slides. Really highlighting the 2025 blight remediation priorities for the Community Development Department. And then the next slide is about what the Redevelopment Authority is thinking. And ultimately, these 2 entities are working hand in hand. And as I suggested, this plan was just recently adopted, but the city's Community Development Department has been actively analyzing the plan recommendations and putting them into place for the last many years. So one of the things the city is looking to do this spring is to establish a blight coordination team. This team will kind of, again, look at the properties that should be prioritized for intervention, understand, the current development opportunities throughout the city, looking at current funding, and making sure that all of these different resources and moving parts are coordinated. And then, thinking a lot about strategic code compliance. And as I suggested a minute ago, the plan recommended this. The Property Maintenance Division has been thinking a lot about this, but this includes, catching problem properties as quickly as possible. So this is something you can do through pre-sales inspections, through the rental license and inspection program that has existed for many years, the vacant property registration. So there's a lot that cities can do. There's a lot of tools they can do, and your property maintenance department has implemented many of these and are considering implementation of more, thinking really hard about strategic code compliance. Like I said, they're already prioritizing properties for intervention using data. They've got a lot of great data, and the data is kind of connecting the dots behind the scenes using this great, national tool. They're absolutely identifying and demolishing dangerous properties. Some properties can't be rehabbed, and so they need to come down, and the city has dedicated funding and has a system in place to demolish dangerous properties. We're always looking to secure funding to support blight remediation. There's a lot of great funding opportunities out there, and the city has recently, in the past couple of years, secured some great funding and will continue funding. The city has a great program to certify blighted properties. That's kind of the way the certification works. Is it all starts again with property maintenance to identify problem properties. You take them to court. When you can't get their attention, you can go through this blighted property review committee to certify properties as blighted. And then once they're certified as blighted, they can be kind of passed along to the Redevelopment Authority to consider for blighted property eminent domain. That process has been in place and active for many years, and the Redevelopment Authority is really gearing up to take properties via blighted property eminent domain. And then the city is also considering establishing a land bank. It's another great tool that our state legislature put in place to allow communities to acquire properties at tax sale, judicial sale, ahead of other investors. And then the Redevelopment Authority is doing great work. They recently hired Dr. Paige Brookins, who's here with us tonight. And their priorities are really around acquiring properties through this great tool that's given to redevelopment authorities, the blighted property eminent domain process. And then, once they acquire properties, there has to be a plan for rehabbing them, demoing them, whatever the next step is. And so they're thinking a lot about engaging partners to assist with that piece of the puzzle. We know that there's a lot of rehab skill in the community. And so the plan is to, engage partners, engage contractors to be ready to take these problem properties and rehab them and then get them on the tax rolls, create housing opportunities and remove blight from the community. And so those are the highlights of both the plan and then pieces, how the plan has been implemented, is being actively implemented throughout the community. So I'm happy to take any questions.
The city has a budget for blighted property. Is that true? And do you know how much it is or has been in the past and what they do with it?
I'm gonna let
the city has set aside $1 million in 2018 for blighted property remediation and a housing fund. It's not the same as a budget, so I wouldn't call it that. The city also has other resources at its disposal, i.e. Both programmed and unprogrammed CDBG funds that can be leveraged working together to remediate these blighted properties through the Redevelopment Authority.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess another question I have is occasionally we will see a property that's in the middle of a row, so an individual house in a row of houses that is in such bad condition that it's a danger risk, to remain standing. It's beyond repair, let's say, but yet difficult to take down because then it exposes what was meant to be interior walls of adjoining houses. And I wonder if there's any, some best practice on how to manage that situation, some sort of finishing system that can be done on the exposed walls, or I don't really know, but this has come up in that blighted property review board or committee, I guess it is.
I would say that one of the challenges with blight is it's very expensive. And and so that's why there's a need to continue to go after state and federal funding to support work like that. Because if you're absolutely correct, Peter, if you're tearing down a building in the middle of a row, it's going to cost that much more to shore up the buildings on either side. So I think that, obviously the first priority is to do what we can to prevent properties from getting that far. And the second is if they can be salvaged. I like trying to salvage these properties because once you tear down that property in the middle of a row of homes, you've kind of changed the look of the block forever. But at the end of the day, sometimes these have to be demolished, and the city, engages the right contractors to make sure that both buildings are shored up and secured. And again, it's an expensive endeavor.
Yes, yeah.
And we do our best to use that tool as a last resort. On the one hand, on the other hand, the team that I'm working to put in place, we're still digging in the details on an old idea from around 2016 that Glenn Steckman, the former city manager, got from somebody in codes at that time, to do a topographical survey, if you will, drone canopy survey. To assess structural integrity and use that to help create kind of a baseline of kind of target properties to go after that or in a, you know, advanced state of disrepair that would be kind of eligible for demolition, in that sort of worst case scenario. And those would be able to be biddable, so that CDBG funds could be used to cover the cost of those demos versus city emergency demo dollars.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there's a legal concern, that we're trying to work through on that, but I believe that's going to again add data points, to properties that should be targeted for acquisition, to see if we can remediate them before worst case they would have to be demolished.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more proactive than the wait and see. It also builds on the
Mhm.
work that the inspectors did during COVID when they had to do the site inspections from the outside.
Yeah. Well, there's the inspectors are challenged with getting into buildings, you know, and this often comes up that
Yeah, you have to be invited in. Peter, people don't understand the government can't just bust in your house.
yeah,
You know, we have to be invited.
yeah. Well, I mean, we try to make this a condition to, you know, table a case if a house has come up to the blight review board, that one that's not been, an inspector's not been inside, we make it a condition that if they will allow us inside, you know, we
Oh,
will
then you won't cite.
table it
Okay,
till the
gotcha.
next meeting, you know,
Yeah,
that
work
sort of
with
thing.
people. I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah. But there's a couple other sort of gaps, and I've heard mention of, you know, the title transfer process in cases where there are cash sales, that, you know, the city, there isn't a way to inform the future buyer, the buyer in this case, that the property is blighted. You would think that people would take notice of, you know, the condition of something they're buying, but oftentimes they don't, or they're out of town anyway.
Well, there's a new state law that allows that, and I know the BPRC has started to implement that. So
Okay,
again,
good.
it's the legislators have listened to local municipalities. I think it was a 2019 law called, I think, something about condemnation. And so one of the challenges with blight and deeming properties blighted is you have to notify the property owner. But when
Mhm.
property owners change hands, you haven't served that property owner. But what this law allows, again, a relatively new law, it allows you to file that violation or file that determination of blight or certification of blight with the deed, with the county recorder of deeds. So you can file that condemnation order with the recorder of deeds. And so then that serves, whether the property owner reads the deed or not is their problem.
Mhm.
From a legal standpoint, that serves as your official notification in the court of law. And so now you don't have to go through the recertification. If you do that process, which costs money and time, if you do that process, then you don't have to go through the recertification process when these properties change hands. And then the second half of that is that if someone does remediate their property, then you have to take that blight certification off of the property. So again, it's an extra cost, but I think it's a cost savings
Mhm.
because it also costs a lot of time and money to, you know, inspect properties and certify them and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think the other thing is when properties go to a sheriff's sale and they are already certified blighted, you know, there is no obligation on the part of the buyer to make a commitment to, you know, rehab the building. So what you end up with is, again, out of town buyers buying groups of blocks of houses, you know, houses by the quantity, sight unseen. You know, they're basically putting a bid in remotely, I guess probably through an attorney or something, and acquiring, you know, a dozen or more properties, many of which are blighted, and they are not under any commitment to do anything with them. You know, which You know, and honestly, we've had these people in front of us or, you know, on a Zoom call, and they're like, well, you know, I didn't see it. I don't know what it is. I'll get to it when I get to it. I'm working on the first one. I'll get to the 13th one later, you know, the sort of thing. And they sit for years.
Yeah, they do. I think two comments on that. I totally agree that it happens. There's some tools again that the city can use. One is
Mhm.
that when properties do change ownership, the property maintenance department sends them a letter and says, we're going to come and inspect your property. And so at that point, there's at least a property maintenance code official that's in touch with that property owner, encouraging them to rehab the property, asking them for a rehab plan, and kind of putting that piece of the puzzle in place. And then
Mhm.
second of all, there's the state law that allows you to not allow these people to buy properties if they have been taken to court, found guilty of having a blighted property and not remediating it within 6 months. And so when the code enforcement officials kind of take those steps, then you
Mhm.
can prevent somebody if someone's like uh, housing license has been revoked. Again, you can prevent them from purchasing new properties.
Mhm.
All this stuff takes time. It's not a perfect system, but there are some tools in place to help address some of those challenges.
Mhm.
But no,
Yeah.
we can't necessarily strong arm somebody into rehabbing a property quickly. In fact, one of the things the redevelopment authority has done, they recently sold some properties to new property owners, and they put a deed restriction on the properties to get people to encourage people to, or require people to rehab these properties within 12 months, or the redevelopment authority could take the property back.
Yeah.
Properties are in terrible shape, and honestly, these people aren't necessarily rehabbing them within 12 months. But one of the, I think, advantages to the redevelopment authority actually owning these properties is that they have a little bit of say in that arm twisting of getting these properties rehabbed in a timely manner.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's hard stuff, though. There's nothing easy about blight remediation.
Mhm.
And in a future case, we would do a lot better to help set these acquisitioners, lack of a better term,
Mhm.
up with a one stop to help them be successful in remediating the blighted properties. I think that's an element that was missed in what the redevelopment authority did last year, and is ultimately going to hinder this group of bidders from being successful in remediating those 4 or 5 properties.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are people buying things for cheap that they have no business buying because they can't afford to do anything with them, and they are just sitting on them because it only cost them $10,000 or something. And in some cases, they are a public hazard. Some of them are actually crumbling, you know, and the city has to step in to you know, stabilize it somehow. It's just I do wish that there was some intervening step to say, you know, you can't, like you're talking about with the redevelopment authority, where we could say to sheriff's sale, well, you can buy this, but you've got 12 months to stabilize it. Otherwise, you know, you have to give it up again. That's what, you know, I wish there was a way to do this, not just for redevelopment authority sales, but for sheriff sales as well. Or
Well, um, Shannon, forgive me. Can you touch a bit on conservatorship and how that could potentially be a third way, to borrow a phrase, and forcing an owner to the table who otherwise is reluctant, but it's not as long or arduous as eminent domain as an undertaking?
Sure. So conservatorship is another state law that allows us to help with blight remediation. What conservatorship does is municipalities can be a conservator, nonprofits can be a conservator, the church down the street from the blighted property can be the conservator, or the neighbor. So you have to have some sort of vested interest as defined by the law. But basically, you go in front of a judge and you say, I have this plan to eliminate the code violations in the property. So it's not necessarily full on blight remediation or rehab, but it's, you know, securing the property, putting a new roof on, putting doors and windows on. So you can go in front of a judge and make an argument that you should be the conservator and take this property under your wings, rehab it, and then or you know, secure it. And when you know, again, during this process, the property owner has to be notified. You have to, you know, show service. It often is another opportunity to get the property owner's attention. And so at the end of the day, you're rehabbing a property that you don't own. But oftentimes or sometimes the property owner will come forward and pay you for your rehab work so they get their property back. Or sometimes the conservator ends up with the property and then can sell the property again with the goal of getting these properties back on the tax roll. So, you know, conservatorship is a great tool. I think, you know, the eminent, because we have an active redevelopment authority and active blighted property review, the eminent domain process is also a great tool. You get to acquire the property, own it, and then kind of make all the decisions. You're not kind of needing to worry about this alternative, this other owner or the owner to just kind of show up. And so what I like to say is that, you know, there's literally 25 blight tools out there, and you have to understand them all and apply them all according to the property. You know, the land bank's another great tool where you're able to acquire properties at judicial sale ahead of other bidders. And so, you know, you start with an upset sale. And if the property isn't sold at upset sale, it goes to judicial sale. And that's also called like the free and clear sale. So all of the baggage, the mortgages, the liens are erased at that point. At the judicial sale, a land bank, their big power is acquiring the properties ahead of it. They don't have to go to the sale. They can enter into an agreement with the county ahead of time and acquire those properties, and then again dispose of them to responsible owners who have to rehab them within whatever time frame they're required to do that. And so as you kind of stare at a blighted property, you say, you know, what's the best tool? And having these tools available is great. Is it conservatorship? Is there a church down the street that can kind of help manage this process? Is it the redevelopment authority going after it? Is it the land bank going after it? Should it be demolished? And or should we have a rehab program and give the owner a little bit of money to just help secure the property? And so having a variety of tools available helps you be able to make the best decision for the really challenging property.
Forgive me, I'm driving. Paige, can we make a note that we want to build a checklist of all those options? And then that checklist can be used per property as kind of an evaluation rubric. Thank you for that, Shannon.
Yeah, having a sort of a plan, you know, a process for determining which path to take on each property. You know, sort of a rubric, and then going after it, because you know, we're going to continue to put properties on the certified list. We need a system to get them off.
200% agreement, and the city through CD is ready, willing, and able to surge resources this year.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
All right, so when the survey was done, were there any trends identified of where the blighted property owners reside? Like, are they residents of the city, county, or are they out of state?
I think
Were there
all of
any
the above.
trends
We can-
found?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know that, but the data is there. So we could pull a report to share that. I think we all know that there's a lot of out-of-state property owners. Again, when you deal with blighted properties, you have to find the owner. You have to find a human being. You can't take a property from someone without notifying the owner. And it's really hard to find these owners sometimes. And so we can absolutely pull some data because it exists. I haven't run those numbers in a while, but there are a lot of course,
Okay.
state owners.
All right, so can you define for me what is a blighted property?
Yeah, no, that's always a great question. the best, easiest answer is to use the state's definition of blight, which the city has adopted. And so the state had a blight definition in a couple different laws. And again, I think it was about 2019 that they actually created. I can share that with Simon to get out to you, but there's a law, a state law that defines blight. And that's your best definition of blight. That's what the Blighted Property Review Committee uses to evaluate whether a property, meets the blight conditions. Because it can mean, blight can of course mean something different to everybody. And so I think it's best to take the state definition. And so when we say we have 200 some odd certified blighted properties, they've been certified according to this common statewide blight definition.
Yeah. It's basically a list of 10 things. And you can certify it blight just if it does not pass one of them. But most of the time they do not pass a multitude of them.
Okay, so if someone owns a property and it's in such poor condition that it's considered blight, you just said that it's trouble finding these people, but aren't they also paying property taxes, or are they no longer paying property taxes?
Well, some of them are and some of them aren't. And so this is how you can have a different plan for every property. The ones that aren't paying property taxes, you can take via judicial sale or upset sale, because they're going to go to a tax sale. A lot of the properties, people are still paying property taxes. And so that's where your blighted property eminent domain is an option, because they're not going to tax sale. People are paying the minimum taxes. And so we have addresses for all of these property owners. Many of the addresses are PO boxes. And so again, it's a little bit difficult to send a constable to a PO box to get service, but there are ways to do this. Again, it costs money to hire a constable. Literally, the redevelopment authority did this to serve a property owner in Brooklyn in order to get service to acquire the property via blighted property eminent domain. So there's tools. The challenge with blight is that it's all expensive and it's time consuming.
So literally, brain meld, when I put in the chat box for Paige, if we could look into hiring a private investigator. I know there's precedent. The ethics board has a private investigator, the charter board has a private investigator. So that might be worth, that is worth looking into to find these owners. Sorry.
And also, if a property is blighted, I'm just assuming that it's in severe disrepair. You're saying that they're buying them for $10,000. They can't afford to do anything with them. Wouldn't that mean they're condemned? Like, that they're not habitable? They're not condemned.
I had this conversation with Heather. If a property is blighted, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not habitable. Blight, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon, blight really is about the exterior look of it and quality of life stuff, right?
Well, if there's missing doors or windows, if the front porch is unsafe, crumbling stairs, garbage, not taking care of the yard, so overgrown weeds. A lot of these fall into the quality of life category. If it's a recurring quality of life violation over and over again. These things come forward. But yeah, the biggies are if the house is unoccupied and if it's not secure, like there's not running water, there are not windows or doors or electricity, it's not being lived in. And whether it can be lived in is a big question. Getting into the building is a problem. Again, oftentimes people do not show up for hearings. We just if they get to the review board and the person does not show up to discuss the property, then they'd sort of automatically get certified. If they do show up and show an intent to rehabilitate the property, we want to see evidence that work is occurring, then we'll table it and let them go another 3 months and see if they're making any progress. It just runs the gamut. I would say that the committee is pretty generous in terms of accommodating people who do show up, do have an intent, have responded to the quality of life issues, have paid the fines, are up to date on taxes, these sorts of things, and we let them try to go and see if they can't get some work done.
And my last question is about the conservatorship. So you said that a neighbor, a church, a nonprofit in the area, someone who may have a vested interest in that property coming back to life could make the repairs on that property, right? Go before a judge and make repairs on that property to get it back into shape, and the owner doesn't lose ownership of that, or just says, hey, thank you for what you did, and just keeps
Yeah.
moving on? I mean,
Yeah,
I
so
don't
the-
understand that.
Good, very good question. So, you know, again, the law fully talks through the process, but ultimately you're rehabbing a property based on an approved rehab plan by a judge, and then you have to keep checking in with the judge. You have to show the judge you have the money to do this, and that the property owner at the end of the conservatorship either has to pay the person or the entity for doing the rehab work, or they would lose the ownership of the property. And so it's a slow moving process maybe for the owner to lose ownership of the property because they can't repay the rehab. But it's all done
But
through the
that-
courts.
But then they get the benefit of the rehab.
If they keep
They
the
get-
property, they have to, if they keep the property, they have to pay the costs that was put into the property, as well as I think there's a developer's fee on top of it for the entity that did the rehab. So they don't just get their property rehabbed. They have to repay them, or they could lose the property.
Who gets to occupy the property while this repayment is occurring?
Well, one of the requirements for conservatorship is that the property has to be vacant.
Mhm.
So no one's living in a property. You can't take a property to conservatorship to a judge if it hasn't been vacant, I think, for 6 months or something like that. They can't have transferred ownership within 6 months.
Or
There's a lot of
marketed.
criteria,
Yeah.
right?
So
Yeah, there's
this
a lot
is-
of criteria for conservatorship.
Well, rehab property is now, something that can generate revenue, right? It can be rented, and there's never any dispute over,
Before it's
what
rented, before you're able to occupy it, the judge is going to finish out the conservatorship and help figure out who owns it at the end of the day. Again, it's a very closely monitored process by a judge. It's not just someone going into a house. Yes.
Shannon, if I may, yeah. So the point of conservatorship, the way it reads, and Shannon can correct me if I'm wrong, is the point is to get the property rehabbed. It's not to make money off of it. It's not to profit. The point is get the property rehabbed. If the owner can then afford to pay the rehabber back, the conservator, great. If you can't, then it gets sold to make the conservator whole. Is that correct?
That's
The gist of it. But the main difference between eminent domain, where you're just sitting and waiting while the legal process proceeds, is you're able to rehab this in parallel to the legal process proceeding.
makes sense.
So kind of walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak.
Yeah.
Good evening. This is Will. When I served a stint on the Blighted Property Review Committee, the city actually did successfully use the conservatorship tool. This would have been in the late 2010s. And the property was in the 1200 block of Hampton Boulevard. And I believe the situation was the owners had died and the heirs were unwilling to take on the burden. And so a conservator was found and appointed. And I believe it was successful for what I've observed, because it's nearby me. So the city could take a look at that and see what it learned from that, the pros and the cons of it. But I believe it did work.
And this won't work for everything, but for example, back in late 2020, early 2021, I had pitched a former city director to go after the site at Third Street and the tracks just below Greenwich. It's a commercial property, to pursue conservatorship, to get it in the beginning stages of some sort of actual usage, versus kind of the facade just falling off into the street, and now you can't even walk up Third Street 4 years later, I think it is, as a tool, to get the bigger pieces certainly moving if possible.
Yeah, so a question I have for us on the planning commission to think about and would ask for input from the administration is, for the practice of conveying the adjacent parcels to the the empty lots, I should say, to the adjacent homeowners, which we've heard about that practice and it makes sense in some situations, is should we be looking at consolidation, that is to say, annexing those parcels to the property of the adjacent homeowner? So something to think about. We don't have to have an answer right now. Just wanted to throw that out there because that would be something, of course, that would be a process that we would have responsibility for. Let's see. A couple of things. The plan, I think, was good. Thank you. I always like to make sure we don't forget, that's built into the process, please, that any historic features be conserved, at least contacting the Artifacts Bank. I know that's been a practice. It hasn't always been done consistently in the past, so I hope that would be maintained. And the other thing is, in some cases, it makes sense to turn the lots into community gardens. I don't know if the city is still promoting that. It had been. I just read today about Philadelphia doing that, even for luxury housing developments. And I've seen some of their community gardens, and I know there's some here in Reading already, and there have been. And I know they kind of come and go sometimes, but just something I want to encourage. I have a few suggestions. I mean, the idea of hiring a private investigator is good, but there's a few areas I don't know if it's possible you could do any cross-checking, Shannon. But to think about is one, sort of along the lines of what I was saying earlier. When a homeowner dies and an estate is opened up, is there some way that there could be a cross-check so that the city can find out about that? Because sometimes that leads to blight. Another one would be when the homeowner is placed in a nursing home by the Office of Aging. I mean, I know there's some confidentiality issues, but is there some way the city can be made aware? And another one would be if the owner were incarcerated. Again, there's data out there. If there's a way for us to be able to access that, to be proactive, like you were saying, is the right approach. Like the root causes of some of these situations. If there's any way you could access that, I think it would be helpful. That's all I have, I think.
Let's see here. I had a few questions here throughout the report. They're talking about quite a few different sources of money, and it seems that in the past we weren't always able to coordinate those sources and put them to the best use. From what I understand, in the past, we've had millions of dollars of home funds just sitting around doing nothing for years. And you have actually 5 years to spend those. Are we beginning to catch up on that kind of stuff?
So, of course, we can't speak on the past, but I've already spoken on the present and the future, Wayne.
There's also the mention of the Keystone Opportunity Zones. We still have those here in Reading? I thought
Those-
that law expired.
There's KIZs. I don't know if there's KOZs still remaining. I can't remember.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I can get back to you on that.
The existing KOZ is in place. I don't know that they're accepting any new zones right now, is my understanding from last year.
And then also something I didn't know about the downtown revitalization public-private partnership with the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. Does that still exist?
No. That was former President Jeff Waltman's brainchild.
Oh, I see. Were we able to, or are we going to soon implement the sidewalk improvement program?
Not the CDBG sidewalk improvement program. We did complete the 2019 residential sidewalk improvement program. And we do hope to bring that back with new funding in 2026 and beyond. That particular program, I believe, remediated 39 owner-occupied sidewalks.
Yeah, because that's helpful. As I think Will and I have often mentioned that sidewalks are quite expensive, and it's not, oftentimes it's not because oftentimes it's not because of the homeowner, it's because of the trees we planted in the 70s and 80s that are ripping up the sidewalks. And I sometimes think that the homeowners feel that they kind of got the short end of the stick, that they didn't have a say as to the planting of the trees, and then after so many years they just pulled up the sidewalks. And I think that's a major reason why a lot of sidewalks are not being replaced.
Yep, and you can't touch that tree without the city arborist approval, unique to Reading. So we're well aware of that. I would say when we get to budget time, it would be most helpful to come and voice support for new funding for this program.
Okay. Okay, and let me see here. Back, I guess, must have been around right when BPRC was beginning. They did do pre-sale inspections for like 6 months, and then the whole thing collapsed, but I forget why. So I don't know if anyone, might have a chance to look into that. I will see if I have some notes about that in my archives somewhere. But yeah, it must have been 2008, as I remember.
Yeah, that's going to be considered in the next round of zoning amendment changes. It's on the radar.
Everything I have. The other comment, the only other comment I had is that over the years, according to how administrations functioned with other nonprofits, some nonprofits that were actually doing good work were then suddenly cut off from federal funding, and then there was a disconnect in their work. I just hope that, we don't, we can kind of have this continuity, that sometimes we didn't have with changes in administration especially. But also sometimes it was community development director that for some reason thought that suddenly a nonprofit that was actually doing a great job suddenly was incompetent. I'm not exactly sure the way to fix that. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, not going to speak on any of that except to say that we are actively communicating with all entities that are under contract for the various direct entitlement programs, and will continue to actively engage them going forward.
And just wanted to say that I did pull the blight list. There are 271 properties on the blight list. Surprisingly, only an increase of 30 over the report from 2019.
Yeah, it doesn't
So,
sound right
I think-
because I signed a bunch of certifications recently. I think there was like 70 of them or something. So
Wow.
these are the mostly people that don't show up for meetings. That doesn't sound right.
Oh, this list is from January.
Oh, okay.
So it's a few months, it's January 2014. So yeah, probably needs to be updated.
Yeah, no. We do, we alternate with a determination and then a certification. So there's 3 certification intervals during the year, I believe. And, a good number of properties get added onto the list, and each one of those, mostly because they don't show up. A few people that do show up still don't have a serious plan or have not responded to requests for serious plans over some number of intervals. But yeah, it should be growing.
And part of the, two quick comments. One is that properties do fall off every now and then. So part of, I know the process that the BPRC does is officially take properties off. And another, part of, again, certifying a property as blighted requires, per law, a lot of notification and documentation. And honestly, it starts years before in the property maintenance department. And so even if we could drive the streets and find 150 properties that looked blighted, you can't certify 150 properties in one meeting because of the requirements for notification, but B, those property owners have a right to show up at the meeting. And so, there, for better or for worse, there's time constraints on certifying properties because the property owners are required to have this due process.
Yeah, it's not fast.
Again, nothing fast or nothing inexpensive about blight, but there are a lot of tools that the city is using today to address blighted properties.
Mhm.
Okay, so we talk about money and we talk about that it takes time. However, when you drive down the street and you're coming into town, like for the arena, for hockey or a concert, and people don't live in the city of Reading or don't often frequent the city of Reading until there's an event, and you drive down the street and you see porches that are falling off, no windows, homes that are not occupied, there's a cost to that, to the city. I was at one venue in the city, Santander, and the comedian said, if Kensington was a city, it would be Reading. And everybody laughed. if you know anything about the area of Philadelphia called Kensington, it's Mad Max, Thunderdome, end of world type thing going on out there. So to have this type of view, appearance, is very, very damaging to the city's reputation. I mean, I had lunch today with a developer from Philadelphia. We were in Mount Airy. And he said he had been to the Marble Ranch. He came into town and he hated it. I said, well, guess what? They just did a restaurant makeover there the other day. And he laughed. He goes, that's really cool. He said he went up to the pagoda. He drove through the neighborhoods. He drove the back way out to Allentown and Boyertown and Birdsboro. He went through all there looking for properties, things to develop. And he said what he said. But there is a cost to the city for that. And if you're living in the city, I wouldn't want the house next door to me to be under that blighted category. And me reporting it back to someone in City Hall, and they say, well, we're working on it, we're working on it. That's a fire hazard. Kids go in there and do all kind of stuff. It could be more and more vandalized, animals go in there. You know, it's just not a good thing. So I think we should take a look at the 200 properties on the list and hold someone accountable. I know it takes a long time. I used to work for the Treasury Department. I did tax levies. You know, I had 90 days process. I contacted people, I filed judgments, I seized properties, I seized businesses, I seized bank accounts. I know all that isn't available to the city. However, we should track down these people. If hiring an investigator works, do our due diligence, because it's depreciating the city's value. And I live here now, I pay property taxes, and I want my property taxes to go to the overall living well in the community. I can tell you, I hate the parking authority, but they're doing a damn good job with cars on the street. Maybe we should take the person who's doing the parking authority and put him in front of the blight committee. Because I hate the parking authority, but you know what? If a car's parked along my street, it gets booted, it gets towed. I don't see any abandoned cars on the streets. So we gotta do something. If we could fix cars, we could fix houses. It just seems like there are a lot of excuses. And it just has to get better. If not, people from outside the city don't want to move into the city. There's no reinvestment. You know, it doesn't make sense. I mean, comedians are coming to town and making jokes about if Kensington was a city, it's Reading. That's eye-opening. You know, yeah. I'm sorry. It just seems to be a lot of excuses here. It does. Go ahead, son.
I think what I have observed.
You always gotta find something to say. Like, you don't know shit about shit.
Me?
No. I'm talking to a friend of mine. Sorry. Should be on mute.
That's a good friend.
I was saying, I think coming in the city, I came here last year, between February through to October. I observed what happened, but from towards the end of the year up to now, I'm seeing tremendous changes of some of the programs that are coming online. I want to associate this with the change of leadership, but also I want to associate this with the change of attitude towards the city, like looking at what is happening with all the plans being adopted, and now at this point we're moving forward with the plans. I'm saying that we are having a responsibility now, like you're talking about, people making fun of the city, and they do. But inside, as I continue working with many programs and many people and even engage with the county, you find that there is that hope, and people are putting purposefully systems in place to ensure that some of these are addressed. Now, the challenge is that the efforts being put in right now perhaps is not too broad or wide enough to be seen, but at least there is something happening compared to last year and perhaps years before. Case in point, for the first time, I'm seeing properties being brought down because they are not in a good shape to be in the city. Now that is happening, cost of the city. For the first time, I'm seeing approval of plans and we are able to sit here and question plans and be able to address them and we get answers. I feel like for the first time, I have had a meeting with the managing director and we have asked him questions about properties which have conflicts and he has taken a step into addressing that. I think with this attitude and also efforts being put in to ensure that plans are in place, we should be able to address the issue of change of plans even with the new leadership, which is likely to happen. But I feel like, and I see plans remaining consistent, but at the same time, looking at the efforts of the team moving forward and putting in place stuff to make sure they address blighted property, I feel like there is more hope than what was there before.
Maybe so. And like I say, I see what Alvernia is doing. I see what the other organizations are doing. That's great. I'm just saying it has to be attacked from multiple directions to make it work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, James, is your friend or the acquaintance, the developers, is he looking for residential development or commercial development?
Commercial. He's commercial.
Okay. Does he know what a CRIZ is? You know, we just got a program to incentivize a redevelopment in the core of our city. That should be pretty interesting to him. So if you would forward him to either me or Paige or Shannon here on the call, one of us, we'd really like to talk to him.
I'll do that.
And one thing that we also should point out is that as Simon pointed out that there are changes in the administration that are very positive. One of the missing links for years in this process was the Reading Redevelopment Authority, and it looks like that's getting fixed. And now that we have a new executive director who is probably more interested in the city than her schooling, like a previous executive director of the Redevelopment Authority. I think we'll see some positive change. You're on mute, Jamar.
Sorry, trying to get my devices together. So yeah, this just to clarify, it still needs board approval. And then apology for my other comments. I was explaining something in the background. What Simon said is 200% spot on. And on the comedian, of course, there's free speech. We can't do anything about that. I would push back vehemently as somebody who is from and lives in Philadelphia and drives through Kensington. It is not anything like what's been depicted in recent years. But the element of projects that are working, like Alvernia, like RAC, whether it's the student union, whether it's White's Healthcare, whether it's the library project at Albright, it's the city is actually open for business. The city has actually been responding, coordinating, and supporting these projects. The city invested a lot of resources in securing the CRIZ designation, which is going to be hugely instrumental in driving commercial and retail development over the next 20, 30 years. So we're doing a lot better. I'm not going to speak on the past. I'm aware of some faults and deficiencies in the past, but I firmly believe we've turned the corner on that and have a lot of the pieces in place. If we could just work together more and support each other more at scale, we can get a lot more achieved.
So, anyone have any other comments?
I just think the city is more organized around redevelopment and good government than I've ever seen in the years I've lived in the city. It was actually the most exciting time for me as a city resident than ever. But, you know, we've got a long way to go in terms of attracting investment, whether on an individual basis to, you know, upgrade their property, or developers who want to bring commercial activity to the downtown. We've got a long way to go to build a pipeline of projects. Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt about that. I think the fact that Alvernia chose to expand into the city, you know, shows that there's a commitment from, you know, our anchor institutions to the downtown. We just need to build on that. We need, you know, someday we'll have you know, critical mass of activity going on that we don't depend on programs like the CRIZ. It will just be attractive enough on its own. But we're a ways away from that.
Very good. I think I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This really gave us a great update on all the moving parts here, and it was actually a very positive update. In the past, when we've had similar, when we've tried to do similar things, they'd always fell apart. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I just want to say that our next meeting is our regular voting meeting on March 25th, 2025 at 6 o'clock. And the next planning commission workshop will be April 15th, 2025. Yeah. So with that, we will, with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, Peter, second?
Second,
James?
I want to do my joke, but we stay here all night. It didn't work. We don't have a name. I'm opposed.
Okay, very good. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, very good. We are out of order. Thank you again very much.